Hello, we're going to go ahead and get started if everybody's ready or just about. Thank you all very much for coming. This is our last event of the season, so we're really thrilled to have you all here, even though it's disappointing that it's the last one. Just a reminder, there will be another series of lovely seminars next year, so there's always more to look forward to. Thank you. In addition, I also wanted to mention, if I get, there we go. We will have all of our 24 events have been recorded, and they're all going to be showing up on our website. So they're in the process of being edited currently. We're not quite up to posting them yet. They'll likely be posted in early September. And so if you have missed a talk that you really wish that you could see, or if you have want to share a talk that you saw with somebody you know, then that's a great way to do it. And we, it's always lovely to see people watching them in the winter and getting ready for the next season. I also wanted to plug our mailing list. There are sheets that you can sign to do it, although I would beg you please to write very clearly, because sometimes people write their email addresses and they don't make it onto our mailing list because I have no idea what they've written. But anyway, so that's just stuff for the future and for next year. This year, fortunately, we have one more fantastic talk that we are really excited about. Today, we are very lucky to have Lusha Tronstad and Scott Hotaling. Did I do it right? No, close enough. I'm sorry. To talk to us about the Teton Alpine Stream Research Project. And this is a real treat because these are parts of this ecosystem that I think a lot of us are really excited about, but don't often get the opportunity to go to. You know, these are the little cracks and crevices that are up at high elevation that we're not necessarily seeing, and the little critters that live in them. So, and they're also very vulnerable habitats. So it's a lovely thing to get to hear about folks who've spent time and hear about them from folks who spend time in them, and also what we need to know about how they're changing.
Well, thank you all for being here. This is pretty exciting. So whenever I think about the Teton Alpine Stream project, obviously being in the Tetons and talking about it is really, feels right. But being at University of Wyoming at a field station like this, like one of the projects that was part of this that I did on for my dissertation back in 2017, we did the experiments over there with someone who is a professor now at Michigan State. Lusha is my one of the co-leads on this project, but then Deb Finn in the back. Deb, if you'll raise your hand. So there's three of us that had kind of started this project 10 years ago. One of Sarah's master's student worked on the project. Maddie with Grand Teton, the physical science folks. Some of the data we're going to talk about is from a collaboration with them. So it really feels like a home court for talking about this kind of stuff. So I should have gone to our first slide so you could actually see some of it. We were just talking about how much we've actually hiked and explored for this project over the last 10 years. And so we came up with a kind of by the numbers. This is actually the Middle Teton Glacier outflow. It was snowing on that day in August 2019, 2018, something like that, when we were up there. So it's very dynamic places. But over the 10 years we've been doing this, we think we've hiked about 1,000 miles and climbed about 250,000 feet vertically. So we plan to keep going, as you will see. So, and we're going to essentially co-present this, but we've been in the field for the last 4 days. So it will be, and we have one mic. So we'll figure out how to not let me dominate it, how to, all of that. So, but first I'll just start with the kind of intro of just like, why do we care about this?
And I think we want to keep this pretty friendly. So if you have questions while we're going, please just, raise your hand and we'll answer questions as we go. Just let us know. So
it can be definitely that way. And we won't keep you here forever, but we don't know exactly how long the slides are going to take. So this is the first time through them. So we're excited as you are to see what is in this talk. So the motivation for this, climate change is dramatically altering the planet. And I think it's pretty well known, people that come to a science talk in a national park, that this is happening. This is Arctic sea ice over the last 40 years. You can see that it's changing dramatically, both in aerial extent, but then also in actual thickness. And we see photos of polar bears, we see things like that, and that's tied to this, and it's really important. But we don't have to go to the Arctic to see these kinds of changes. So this is roughly 100 years of change of mountain glaciers all along the western U.S. Glacier National Park, the Sierra Nevada, Mount Rainier. This video is also on YouTube if you want to track it down and watch it later. we'll let a few of them play. But it's pretty alarming how much ice is being lost from mountains in the US and around the world. And these are literal water towers. I mean, these are the water resources that if you live in a mountainous place, you literally live downstream. And so these are some of the biggest natural reservoirs on Earth, these chunks of ice. And places like that, and an entire glacier has essentially vanished in 60 years. And so these are not on millennial timescales, these are on human timescales. But yeah, there's several more, but in the interest of time and not totally depressing everyone, we'll continue. But one thing, so we're giving a public presentation. This is public facing. If you're a scientist and you really want to see like the nitty gritty detail of this, you're going to be underwhelmed. This talk is not really for you. And so part of that is we really want to connect more with the public and share our science beyond typical avenues of academia. So we created a YouTube channel where we're actually making videos of our efforts and days in the field, things like that, then and now, glacier videos. So feel free to check it out. We would love to have more people engaging with it. And so why are the glaciers going away? The Earth is warming. And so this is an example of Western US snowpack over the last 40 years. This is actually just from Utah. So I live and work in Utah, so I use Utah data for this. And if we look anywhere around the West, I mean, you can pick any state, almost any telemetry site that measures snowpack over time, and you can get the same roughly downward trend. So this is year on the x-axis. And sorry if this is a little bit small text. I wasn't sure how the room would be laid out. It's about a 16% decline in snowpack in Utah since 1979. And we had a really historic winter in 2023, which was where everything was almost above the trend line. And if you remove that total outlier winter, it's about a 26% decline. So it's roughly like 0.4% less snow every year than the last year. And in places like Salt Lake City in Utah, they get 90% of their city water is from seasonal snowpack. So there's 2 million people living there. You can kind of do the math that that's a pretty major problem. And it varies depending on if you're at high elevation, lower, somewhere southern part of the state, et cetera. But the overall trend is always down. And the reason for that is not that we're getting less precipitation. It's not that it's, just snowing less. It's that because of ambient warming, I'll kind of circle into this plot in particular. This is the ratio of snow to overall precipitation. Red is going down. So essentially more of our precipitation is falling as rain, whereas it used to fall as snow. And that changes that accumulation patterns and melt out and everything else. And all of this is combining for a projected low to no snow future. And that the premise of this is that, every year we have this seasonal accumulation of snowpack in the Tetons, in the Wasatch, in the Rocky Mountains, whatever mountain range you want to think about. And, that the snow builds up, you have a big, deep pile of snow, and then it slowly melts out into the summer. And you have really important water resources in like September and August that are coming from that melt out. Helps to protect the glaciers because, it buffers the ice. And so essentially, this is a projection for the upper Colorado River watershed, which is probably the most important watershed in the US. And by about 2062, we should start seeing years, these kind of dark red lines, where we essentially don't have a seasonal snowpack. It doesn't accumulate. It still snows, but it snows and melts out, and you don't get that big buffering amount of ice that will then support, the following summer. So these are transformative changes. They're not just like that kind of incremental stuff that I was showing on the last slide, and we're very much moving towards that. And so one more slide of setup to why we created the TASR, as we call it, Teton Alpine Stream Research Project, is that mountains are really important. And they aren't just important because of water and snowpack. We've known for a couple hundred years that they have this vertical zonation of habitat that allows for all these different species to use them and live in different places and change, habitats going vertically. There's some great analyses showing that species are really heavily concentrated in mountains. So even though mountains are a smaller footprint on the overall planet, what actually lives there is much higher density in terms of different amphibians and birds and mammals and whatever else. And then, like I was talking about earlier, they're also changing really, really fast. And so there's all these headlines like, you know, entire glaciers are going away. They are no longer there. The ice is gone. And so it's a dynamic place that requires a lot of attention, but they're really hard places to study. And so they aren't, you can't just, I mean, we just talked about like 250,000 feet of hiking vertically in 10 years. That sounds really fun. And I promise you it is, but like yesterday, I mean, we hiked 20 miles, got out at 8:30 at night. Like it's very, very hard physical work to collect these data. So it's not the easiest place in the world to monitor. So I think here I'll turn it over to Lusha to maybe just talk about TASR and how it came to be and why we created it. And if you want to click it. Yeah. So, and Lusha will get to experience what's on this slide. So I kind of pulled these together. So this is not like she's on the fly.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
You'll see me flying.
Yeah.
So yeah, Lusha Tronstad, I am the invertebrate zoologist for the state of Wyoming, more or less. I study invertebrates, so we do a lot. My job, I do a lot with rare invertebrates. So with TASR, we study 2 rare stoneflies. But anyway, we started working in the Tetons in 2015, and we've collected data every year during early August since that year. And so this year is 10 years. So we're pretty excited to start looking at trends over time. And these are our sites. We've we've split our sites up by how the stream is fed. So some of these streams are fed by surface glaciers, some are fed by perennial snowfields, and a third set are fed by subterranean ice or rock glaciers. And we'll tell you more about those because most people haven't heard about it.
Yeah, who has heard of a rock glacier before walking in here tonight? So like, yeah, so it's we're trying to bolster that number through time. So
yeah, don't worry.
Yeah,
I hadn't heard of them either.
Yeah.
But now I love them. Okay, so some of our main questions are, how are the mountain streams changing? Do rates of change depend on this water source being fed by glaciers, rock glaciers, or perennial snowfields? And how do invertebrate communities change and microbial communities? And we've actually measured a lot of different things about these streams, from physical habitat, chemistry, and the biota. So we've done a lot of things, and we're really excited to start looking at the trends over time. And this is a map of all of our sites. So you can see, like, here's our surface glacial sites. These orange ones are snow melt, and then the green are our subterranean ice rock glaciers. Oh yeah, and here's abiotic, so temperature, suspended solids, which is all that stuff in the water, could be rocks, could be organic matter, pH, conductivity, and dissolved oxygen. And we've been fortunate to work with a lot of great people. And currently we have 3 students working on it. Anna, she's working with Scott at Utah on her PhD looking at the biogeochemistry of rock glaciers. Josh, he's working on compilating all of our data, right? And DNA barcoding?
Yes, so using genetics to determine what's in a sample instead of just morphology, because we know that there's a lot more than just what something looks like.
And then Taylor's working on her PhD looking at microbes in these different types of streams. Okay, hidden ice in high elevation ecosystems. Do you want to take over?
Yeah, maybe I should hop on this. So
I wonder.
This is, we're going to talk about rock glaciers themselves and what they are. So this is actually a rock glacier in the La Salles in Utah, so in southern Utah, so super dry place. Essentially, what you can see here is there is ice underneath this talus, and it's flowing downhill, and that's why you get this kind of low where it's moving. You get this toe where what the geologic term is an oversteepened front, And that's because the ice is actually pushing the talus forward. And so it gets steeper than the angle of repose. And what's crazy about this is like, when you look at this, you don't see any ice there. You don't see a glacier, but this feeds, a number of streams. There's a little pond right here. There's actually another rock glacier over there. These rock glaciers are throughout the western US. They outnumber the surface ice features you see in the Teton Range by roughly 2 to 1, maybe more than that, especially as those surface ice features go away. And just to show you kind of really clearly, this is a surface ice glacier. So the terminology is a little challenging. So when you say glacier, people think of, they look up on the Tetons and see the Middle Teton Glacier, and that's a glacier. This is also a glacier, but it's a different type. So a surface glacier, rock glacier, again, you see the flow, you see the lobes where it's moving around on something. This is actually on Mount Timpanogos in Utah. And so those are the two we're going to be talking about a fair amount today. And rock glaciers are exceptionally common. So there's roughly 10,000 in the Western US. There are about 90 in the Teton Range. Maddie's actually working on a much better map of the Teton Range. So this will be updated with better data soon. And there are only 11 of those active surface ice glaciers in the Teton Range. And these cover a large amount of area too, relative to those surface glaciers, a lot of ice in these. And so this is some really exciting stuff that we've been working on with Grand Teton National Park, where the park has actually gone out and flown essentially lasers from an airplane, LiDAR, that tells you exactly like down to, centimeter level, what's on the ground. And so for the basically most of Grand Teton National Park. So then in 2014, in September, so when all the snow melt and everything else was gone, so you could really see, the ice itself or rock or whatever. Then they did it again in 2022. So it's a really amazing data set because you can actually difference those two and ask how much has something changed vertically? Has it moved laterally? Those kinds of things. And so this data set hits at something that we've been thinking about and proposing, an idea that rock glaciers are going to exist on the landscape longer than surface ice features because they're insulated. It's the same, like you can actually run this experiment in your backyard next time it snows, take 2 piles of snow, put a tarp, dust, rocks, whatever on one of the piles, and then see how long they take to melt out. The pile that's covered in something will last longer than the one that is just exposed. It's the same idea, just on a much larger scale. So this is what the park, so people like Simeon Caskey, who's the park physical scientist, and then Ash and Dan McGrath at CSU. And I just want to give you an example of what some of this stuff looks like. So this is a vertical satellite image of a mountain that probably many of you have heard of before. So that is the Grand Teton. This over here is an unnamed rock glacier. A side note is I think rock glaciers should have names. And so maybe we'll work on that. But that's an unnamed rock glacier. And then this is the Teton Glacier, and then which is the largest glacier in the park in terms of total ice. And this is the Middle Teton Glacier. And so I'm just going to use these 3 features to kind of illustrate this. And so if you look at elevation change over that 8-year period, blue means it went up. There's more of it there. Red means it went down. There's very little blue on the landscape. There's a lot of red. This is in vertical meters of change. So in 8 years. So you don't need a scale to understand that the Teton Glacier changed a lot during those 8 years. I mean, there are meters of ice lost. Same with the Middle Teton Glacier. The rock glacier over here was largely the same over the exact same period due to that insulating debris cover. So again, there's the features and there's the change. And so we can now quantify that for every glacier and rock glacier in the park. And so here are all of the active surface ice glaciers in the park. Unless you are extremely colorblind, you can probably tell a pattern here. They're all kind of pretty red, which is very unfortunate. And we can calculate the rate of change vertically for all of those features over the time period. And generally speaking, it's about 0.7 meters of ice loss per year. So a meter's like roughly this. So it's like half a person being lost every year vertically. And so rock glaciers, though, are not following this trend. So if we look at all the surface ice glaciers again, and here are a few representative rock glaciers strewn throughout the park. We can actually compare those two. And the rate of change for the rock glaciers is rather close to zero. So they have been essentially stable in the park despite widespread ice loss in the surface ice glaciers. So extremely exciting stuff. Yeah, wanna hop in?
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I thought you were trying to hop in.
No,
Okay.
I was.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, this is probably a good place. Like, why do we care about rock glaciers and biodiversity? And
Oh, go ahead.
okay. So the reason we're so interested in this is because if there are species that live in cold water and they live in the meltwater of a glacier, they live in the meltwater of a snowfield, live in the meltwater of a rock glacier, the glacier and the snowfield are going away really rapidly, and the rock glacier is going to persist. That is a refugial area. That's a refugial habitat. So there's going to be climate change refugia. We wrote a paper a couple of years ago describing how if this is the present with big surface glaciers and snow and all of this, and this is the future, which is going to be rock glacier dominated, like unfortunately in decades time, like the Teton Range will have a much higher density of rock glaciers relative to surface ice. Then those streams and those habitats and those rock glacier areas become much more important. And so that we don't really need that. And so our central prediction that kind of guides all of this work is that these rock glacier fed streams will be more environmentally stable under climate change. And that stability will extend from not just the physical habitat to the aquatic community, the genetics of that aquatic community, microbes that are living there. They're just going to be places where these cold water habitats are going to be maintained long beyond other surface ice features. And this is one of our bugs, which is a really great place for Lusha is the expert on aquatic insects in the Western US. So
I'm the bug lady.
yeah, here, I'll have it actually start. This is not one of our bugs, and it's representative.
It's from where I grew up.
Yeah.
So I grew up by Glacier National Park, and this is where Lednia tumana lives, which is now federally protected because it only lives in that area. But we have a cousin species, Lednia tetonica, and from the name, yes, it only lives in the Teton Range, and they look very, very, very similar. But we also have another stonefly called Tabata glacier, or the Western glacier stonefly, that lives in both Glacier National Park and Grand Teton and surrounding area. That stonefly is also federally protected under the Endangered Species Act because it lives in just not many places, and glaciers are melting, and so they their habitat is thought to be going away. Yes, what else do we want to do?
Let's see what the next slide is.
Okay.
We'll find out together. Yeah.
Okay.
On temperature trends.
Okay, so now let's look at temperature trends. So remember, we have those three different stream types. We have the surface glacier, the rock glaciers, and the snowmelt, and it's up top there. So we have been recording data year-round in these streams, and this is just August data here. So one of the most important times, because usually the warmest time of year. So here, this is a glacier-fed stream right here, a surface glacier, and this is the temperature. Here we have years, 2015 through 2022. And what I want you to take away from this is that the temperature of these streams are not increasing over time. Do you want to say your stats? Okay.
I mean, basically, yeah, they're essentially flat. This is about 8 years of data. We're going to have a couple more years to add to this very soon, which we're excited about. And we'll kind of hop to the next one. And the rock glaciers are basically following the same trend. Like there's statistical chance that 62% chance that they will be warmer next year than the last. The glacier fed streams are about a 50-50 chance. So maybe they're slightly warming. And if they are warming, they're warming at about 0.08 degrees Celsius a year, which is not that much at the moment. But the really kind of crazy ones, we haven't talked about very much, these perennial snow-fed streams that don't have any kind of permanent, semi-permanent ice feature feeding them. But these snowmelt-fed streams that we study are warming extremely fast. So there's a 99.6% chance that the next year will be warmer than the last year for a snowmelt fed stream in this area. And the rate is about 0.8 degrees Celsius per year. So that is fairly alarming. But this, I just showed you a bunch of data about how much vertical ice is being lost from glaciers. So why are the streams not warming that come out of them? And basically our thinking on this is that all of that ice, all of that meltwater is keeping the stream cold. And so the question becomes, for how long? You know, as that ice block gets smaller, eventually, we're essentially expecting that as, eventually there's not maybe enough meltwater to buffer the stream temperature anymore, and there will be a fairly rapid increase in stream temperatures, but that has not happened yet. So, you want to talk about communities and what the
I can.
NPS.
Okay, so this is called a non-metric multidimensional scaling. Don't be afraid, it's okay. So basically what we're plotting here are just the invertebrates that we're finding. And so we have the different taxa. You think of them as species, right, that we identify. And so they're just occupying some space, like little polygons, triangles and squares and things like that. And so when they overlap, that means they're really similar. When they're not overlapping, it means that the communities are different. All right, so first off, well, there it is. We have surface glacier streams. Here's our snowmelt. Here's our subterranean ice rock glaciers here. Yeah.
Just correct one.
Oh,
This is my fault. I didn't allow these to be plotted together.
yes.
So these are just looking at each category separately. So don't take this that they are all totally different groups, because these are all separate plots side by side.
Yes.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that was clear.
Yes, no.
Yeah.
And so, yes, he has these separated. So each of these axes is the same down here, so they're not overlapping. But these are the different stream types here. And so they're color coded, and then we have all the different years. This is 8 years of data. And so what we can see is, like, all of our surface glacier streams, the invertebrates that live there, all the communities are overlapping. So they're really similar. So bugs that live in below glaciers, they're all similar. Same thing with our snowmelt streams and our subterranean ice. If we would plot these over the top of one another, we would see that they do overlap to a large degree, especially our subterranean ice, our rock glaciers, and our surface glaciers. And that's really good news. We, with all these climate change talks and things like that, it's nice to have some good news, you know what I mean? And so we're actually really excited about these results, because when these surface glaciers go away, if they have similar communities, these rock glacier streams are refugia. These are places that a lot of the bugs that live here already live, and so they can probably live here. So it's a refuge. And I think to a lesser degree the snowmelt, but some of them do overlap. Okay, more biodiversity. Okay, this is not as exciting as the first slide. This is sad news, but this is species richness. This is the number of invertebrate species that we measure every year per stream. And yeah, it's really messy. So, but don't worry. Each color just refers to a different stream. We sample 12 streams every year. But what we want you to take away from this is, here's our years here, and this black line. That's the overall line when we consider all the other colors. The number of invertebrates living in these streams is decreasing over this 8 years of data that we have. Oh, do you have a question?
No.
Oh, I didn't see, sorry, thank you.
A question.
Yeah.
I've noticed in a lot of your figures that you at around 2020, a lot of the, I don't want to say like overarching trends, but you kind of see a slight increase in you're talking about stream temperature and species richness. Is that due to COVID? And so we're kind of seeing that slight increase because of the lag of all that human activity. And do you expect us to see a lag, so it to kind of decrease
Mhm.
a bit more steeper now?
That's a really good question. I hadn't thought about COVID before, but you know, I think a lot of the variation in the data is due to snowpack and what kind of winter we had, how quickly it melted out and whatnot. Frankly, COVID, there were a lot of people here. And you know, people were flocking to national parks during COVID. So it was actually quite busy here. And I would not say that, in my mind, I don't think it was from the lack of people because there might have been more people during COVID, I would say. But that's a very interesting hypothesis. But yeah, I think it's more, I think this annual variation is more due to our snowpack and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I agree.
Okay, he concurs. Great. It's always good when your
Great for
co-author
carbon
concurs.
People's not traveling was great for the planet and the glaciers as a whole.
Yeah.
We should all do less of it.
Next, we're gonna just throw some pH numbers up here for you. So the pH of these streams, these are all the different streams. And you can see pH varies quite a bit among streams. Each one of these is a stream. And so you can see among years, there's a bit of variation in the pH. And here's another plot, another way to look at the same data. This is our surface glaciers. Well, we have one site it's not really a rock glacier. It's a cave with subterranean ice, like buried ice in this cave. So this one we pulled out separately. Here's the rock glaciers. Here's snowmelt. So you know, in general, we have lower pH in snowmelt and surface glacier streams. And in general, the subterranean ice streams have a higher pH. And here is our plot over time, pH in year. And so you can see that we're seeing a decrease in pH. We're really stumped by this, but we did find out that my pH sensor is faulty, probably for the last 2 years. So I'm gonna get a new one.
And we discovered this yesterday.
Yeah,
So
yesterday.
this is already, but we're not totally sure that it's that's all that's going on. I mean, we've measured plenty of pH with other sensors, but it is a good reminder to take, you know, like we finally brought multiple pH meters to a stream and we're like, okay, we should be looking at our equipment a little bit in this question. So we're always, when we see something like this, like why should the streams be becoming much more acidic over time? It's possible, but we should explore all options as scientists before we make any strong conclusions, basically. That's why we could have deleted this and not talked about this little issue, but I think it's kind of a good human component. Yeah.
Stream flows and correlating pH with the stream flow amounts.
We are now measuring stream flow, not because of that, but because measuring stream flow is really hard, and actually getting in stream gauging to actually have regular data on how much water is coming out of these features is really expensive and really time consuming. And we've been largely on a shoestring budget. If anyone wants to support mountain research and has, you know, wants to be philanthropic, we could really use it at times, but we've always been kind of like deciding what can be done. But as you'll see in the next slide, actually, we've been installing some of these devices called pressure transducers, which actually allow us to get continuous flow data from some of these streams. We have a really important stream flow question that's one of our sites that's been happening. One of the little stories we'll talk about.
Yeah, we'll get there in a minute. Yeah, like Scott was saying, you know, usually people have flow meters and you can measure the water velocity in the stream, but we can't use those in our streams, not because we don't want to carry them up and they're heavy and bulky, but because the conductivity, the amount of salt in the water is so low that these meters don't work. So we have to think of more original methods, a little different methods than a lot of people use. So we're going to be looking at pH more, and as we were talking about, yes, pH could change. You know, a lot of times when we apply fertilizer to fields that comes off, and we have a largely granite geology in the Tetons, that doesn't allow for much buffering capacity whatsoever. So atmospheric deposition, you know, all the nitrogen and whatnot raining down out of the sky can definitely decrease pH. So this is something we want to research and carefully investigate. Okay. Are we witnessing the transformation of an ecosystem? So this is where we want to talk about one of our rock glaciers. This is a Paintbrush Canyon, and I remember the first time I visited the stream was in 2012. I remember I was actually doing my dishes in it, and it was really cold, and there was a lot of water, and there was a lot of invertebrates in it as well. But now it's changing quite a bit, and so this is the lobe of the rock glacier right there, where we have the buried ice under the ground. And then, of course, we measure the stream, which is where that star is there. So this rock glacier is probably running out of ice. And because the flow is now becoming intermittent, so it doesn't flow year round. It's stopping towards the end of summer. And so here Scott's plotted, this is year again, and this is the number of days where the water is above 20 degrees Celsius. Remember, 20 degrees Celsius is about room temperature. That's really warm. So, and we would not expect that from a rock glacier stream where the temperatures are usually near freezing. So it should be around 0 degrees Celsius. So the number of days where that stream is above room temperature has been increasing over, this looks like 7 years of data. So yeah, it's getting a lot warmer. Here's the first day when the stream reaches 20 degrees Celsius. Note that that is getting earlier and earlier each summer. Again, the rock glacier is running out of ice, and so the water is warming earlier and earlier each year. And this is another trend we've observed. This is the number of invertebrate species that we've been collecting. And note that it's decreasing, and we haven't even been able to sample this stream. We're going to be going in a few days because it's not flowing, and so there's very few invertebrates remaining in some little tiny pools in this stream. So this is just an example of what happens. This is what we expect to happen to a lot of surface glaciers and rock glaciers in the future. When they're running low on ice, they're going to stop being perennial. They're going to start being intermittent streams where they only flow for part of the season, and eventually they'll go dry. So this is the rock glacier that I was just showing you. And it doesn't look like it's changed very much.
Well,
what were you going to say?
so Maddie actually made this plot for me. So
okay.
Thanks to her. This is actually using the LiDAR data to assess how much that feature is changing. And yeah, like you might be like, well, you just told me rock glaciers are going to last forever. Why are you now showing me this rock glacier where it's changing? Science is messy. Mountains are messy. Mountain streams are messy. And so this rock glacier is very small. Like it's a little tiny lobe. And if it does have some amount of internal ice, it might not have much. And actually this year, when we were up there maybe a month ago, my first thought seeing it was, man, that the lobe itself looks kind of sunken in relative to previous years. So these things are not just totally, can avoid any ice loss. And so Maddie actually calculated how much it's changing on a per year basis. Or this actually might have been Ash. Maybe I'm giving the wrong credit. I don't know. Okay, so Ash at CSU, Maddie also looked at some stuff about this. There were some text exchanges that we were trying to figure this out, but it's losing about 0.1 meters of vertical change each year. So even though it's a rock glacier, even though it is covered by debris and is insulated, it's still also changing to some degree. And that little bit of change might be really important for the stream that's directly down from it. But going back to this gentleman's question, we're trying to understand this intermittency better and more, quantify how much water is coming out of these features. Is that changing? It's a big open question. And so this is actually installing a pressure transducer. Here are two of our audience members right here. And then this is Dr. Ryan Webb from the University of Wyoming, who's a hydrologist. And so we installed, this is in the same stream, a pressure transducer, which allows us to actually quantify how much water is in the stream over time. So this is how much water is in the stream in July. And we're going to go back up there in a few days and look at this. And I wish maybe we already had, so I could show you how much it changed in just a matter of a few weeks. There will be much, much less water flowing down the stream 3 weeks later than there was then.
Can you record that when you're not there?
Yeah, so the point of this is that, so we'll install these pressure transducers. I won't get into all the details of them, but they're recording pressure in the underneath the water every hour continuously. And so then we'll go up there and we'll actually measure the flow of the stream physically. And then we can relate those two values once we have enough of them. And so then we can take the continuous measurement and convert it to continuous discharge. So we already are producing year-round hydrographs of how much water is coming out of all these features every year through time. So we'll be able to basically make the same plots we made for temperature or whatever of actual flow data, which is a really important metric of, how it impacts, water availability and that kind of thing. So, Lusha, you want to talk about where we're going?
Either way.
Sure.
Okay, where are we going, Scott?
Oh.
Well,
So we do
nowhere.
Oh.
No. Okay, so we plan to keep collecting. Basically, we want to keep monitoring these streams in the future as air temperatures continue to rise and, surface glaciers continue to melt, our perennial snowfields melt, and hopefully we will find that rock glaciers melt less. So we want to keep watching and keep monitoring our alpine streams. And we want to improve our infrastructure. Like Scott said, we've been super grateful to UW-NPS. They funded us for 7 years, $5,000 a year. We're a real bargain. But we're on a real shoestring, but I think we've done a lot with it, but we want to keep going and develop methods and get better instrumentation so we can measure these things a lot better. And we're really excited, as I mentioned, this year is 10 years of data. And so finally, we can start analyzing trends. How are these streams changing? How are the different stream types changing? How do they contrast from one another? And so in 5 days, we'll have that data in hand and we can start doing that. And so, yeah, we're really excited to do that. Yep.
So on that last point, we obviously could analyze a trend at any time. You have 2 points, you can draw a line between them. These are snowpack varies dramatically year to year in these places. So we don't want to get carried away with whatever we see, after 4 years. And so we always were kind of like, well, let's start thinking about that at the, roughly the 10-year mark, which sounded ridiculous when we started this. Like 10 years seemed like so far away when we were trying to piece this together every year. And I also want to note that I don't know if this is actually true globally, but at least in North America, this is the longest running continuous alpine stream study anywhere. And so we're pretty proud of that. And it's also like for every year of data we collect, it becomes that much more important that it continues. So we are coming to these streams indefinitely. Like we will be up there every year, no matter what our funding situation or whatever it is. So we're pretty
Dedicated.
Yeah, we're committed to this. So
Thank you.
yeah. Happy to take some questions. This is my student Anna and I up at Delta Lake, coring the lake in May, which I thought was a pretty fun little time lapse. So
Any questions for our speakers?
yeah, do we need to do
No, you're good.
Mike? Okay, sure. Let's go in the very back first. They're every combination you can imagine. I am making this very clean. They're far from clean. Like there will be rock fall events onto a glacier, and then that glacier will extend for a few years because now it's insulated, and then that will get moved downhill and it'll start melting again. Often the toe of a glacier is covered by debris. There are debris covered glaciers versus rock glaciers do you have a layer of rock and then all ice? Do you have a mixture? It's the geomorphologists, if there's any in the room, they understand this is not a trivial thing. Yeah.
How thick the ice is in any of the rock glaciers, and is there any permafrost underneath the ice? And is the communication with the water table only when it gets to lower elevation or flat?
So this is why these are some very big questions. So the questions were, do you know how thick the ice is in a rock glacier? No, they're extremely hard to measure and image and figure that out. Do you know if there's any ice underlying the rock glacier feature? Probably. I mean, there's actually many people consider rock glaciers to be permafrost themselves. I, as a non-expert, so I really shouldn't have an opinion about this, but I don't think that makes sense because they move. And then what are the interactions with the water table? Is that only when there's, I forget all of it, but I'll just say we don't really know a lot about how they interact with the water table. One of the things that I wonder about is, even if the rock glacier itself, like we see, like we go to a rock glacier, the water's really cold, we're like, oh man, this is because it's ice melt. Not necessarily. Like if it rained, rain percolates in, touches the ice, cools down, flows out, and now it's really cold, but it's actually mostly rainwater. That would still look like meltwater because we can't dig in and actually see where all the water is going. So we have a lot fewer answers than we have questions, but hopefully over time that will change. But those are really good points.
I think the other really interesting thing that I learned about rock glaciers is they breathe. And so in the wintertime, they'll take in a bunch of cold air to stay colder. And then in the summertime, they release it. And so it helps them stay cold throughout the year. Again, making them more refuge type.
Yeah. It's essentially like a chimney effect that works in some physics component that people that are smarter than me have described, but it's really neat how that works. And so it's also why like a lot of pike end things live around rock glaciers because they're cooler and they have that thermal refuge. So it's not all about aquatic biodiversity, even though that's all we've talked about today. Yeah.
So what are the species mobile enough to get to these refuge habitats? You know, if one dries up, will they just die out, or will they?
They can definitely get between them. I mean, the expert among the three of us about dispersal of aquatic invertebrates is Deb Finn sitting back there. The question is, how well can they get between them? And the answer is they can find their way between them, whether actively by flying or getting caught in like a wind gust. Is that fair, Deb?
I think it's fair, but also when we talk about refugia, like for species, usually we're thinking not in terms of individuals, we're thinking about like the whole species, right, like the population. So, you know, the sapping is probably, you know, like when, you know, the surface glacier that's tiny now is totally gone, and suddenly the stream's gone too. Probably most of the things that are living in that stream are not going to get up and fly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the individuals are not going to do well. Yeah.
You know, these other stream types that are going to be more resistant to change, and there are members of that same species, you know, using those locations. I think that's important.
Yeah.
But also, like another component of that is the population becomes more isolated as individual things blink out. If those two populations of the same species are now farther apart, then it becomes the whole population, the whole species is less resilient because if something happened here, now they're farther away from suitable habitat.
I think this also gives us an opportunity for management actions. We know there's refuges out there, refugia, and you know, we can move individuals between these areas so that, you know, we could introduce them potentially to some of these rock glacier streams where, you know, as humans, we think habitat is suitable for them. But you know, I think it just allows for potential management options rather than, wow, their habitat's gone, all the glaciers have melted. So we have options. Yes. Yeah.
I think you kind of already answered it, but do you have any other applications for conservation from your research?
Yeah, I think, again, just finding out that rock glaciers are potential refugia, that they're not melting out near as fast. I mean, that's just great news and allows, you know, a lot of potential options out there for habitat. I think one thing we need to do better is figure out for these rare stoneflies, learn a little more about habitat suitability. What exactly are the conditions that they need to live in so that if we did need to translocate populations, you know, we have a method to figure out, okay, those streams over there, those would be good ones, those wouldn't, things like that. You want to add any more?
Sure. And one thing, like we have this kind of long-term monitoring for data collection that we're talking about, kind of the overarching umbrella. we've done all these little small, projects and experiments and dissertation chapters and theses during it. And going back to Lusha's point about like understanding these species better. So like this stonefly, Lednia teutonica, and its con-specific, Lednia tumani, congeneric, they've always been billed as like the canary in the coal mine of climate change. Like as glaciers go away, these species are totally screwed, and like they're the pika of high mountain streams. They can't handle any warm temperature. They're all gonna die, kind of thing. And like that was what I thought too for my PhD. And then working with a professor at Michigan State, Alicia Shaw, we actually did some environmental physiology of these stoneflies. And it turns out they are physiological tanks. Like we would put them in an algae and take them out to like do some kind of test work. This is before they were endangered, luckily, so it's easier to work with them. And like, they were in an algae and sealed in a backpack for 3 days hiking out, and they were totally fine, after that trek. And so we were like, man, that is surprising. And so what we think actually might be going on here is that it's not so much that they're like, they just require these cold conditions, but they're being outcompeted or something being predated upon, or who knows, in other habitats, and they've been forced into these margins because they're tolerant of them. It doesn't mean they aren't still threatened under the same mechanism of glacier loss, because if the glacier goes away and now their predator that can't handle cold temperatures can now invade that habitat, then it's the same outcome for a different mechanism. But what it showed us is there is so much we don't know about the individual species. Like there are streams like in Garnet Canyon up here, if you've been there. There is one stream that is full of Lednia teutonica. Every rock you flip has 4 or 5 on it. There are streams 20 feet away that seem very, very similar that don't have any. And like, what's the difference in those two habitats in terms of protecting habitat or conserving them?
Yes. And I just add that rare species, they're really tricky because it's hard to figure out where they're going to live, like Scott was saying. And I have another student, she's been working on a rare beetle that lives in really salty streams in the basin of Wyoming. Again, they're only in these really salty streams, and we thought that they selected for these streams because physiologically that's how they were adapted, right? They have lower mortality when it's saltier. She did all these experiments and found out that actually in the streams we're finding up to 90% mortality. So, there's a lot of fitness consequences. They're dying because they're in these really salty streams. And I bet if we did something similar, we'd find that, these stoneflies, they're not physiologically adapted to these really cold temperatures, and their fitness is probably suffering for living at these really cold temperatures. But like, we think it's something like competition and predation, like Scott was saying, that forces them there. So yeah, it's very interesting. And I think what we're doing is something that we have to change our thinking about rare species. And there hasn't been a lot done on animals. So that's one aspect I think is really interesting.
We're approaching an hour. I don't want to.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do these stoneflies fit into a food web, and what are the species are different?
Oh, excellent question. So Sarah's student, Karen Jorgensen, did that for her thesis a couple of years ago, and she used isotopes to figure that out. But these stoneflies primarily eat algae and whatnot. So at the base of the food web, usually when we look up these taxa, they say that they are shredders. So they take leaves and things like that and rip them up and eat all the microbes off. But there aren't really many bushes in the alpine areas. So we were always a little skeptical about that. But yeah, Karen's study showed that they are eating mostly algae.
And there are a lot of things that eat them too.
Yeah.
So in the stream, and then like we were at Wind Cave over outside of Driggs today. Wind Cave is actually the site where Lednia teutonica was originally described from. Going back to your question, sort of, that species was first described, first time anyone had ever really written down that it existed in 2012. So this is like, not like, back in 1900, someone discovered this thing and we've known about it forever. I mean, that was and for basically until we started working on it 6-7 years later, that was the only site in the world where Lednia teutonica was known from. And so if you're up there at the right time of year, like today, there are Lednia teutonica adults crawling all over the walls of the cave, and you can commonly watch various bird species up there picking them off the cave walls and around the entrance. And so there's a lot of connections between the aquatic biodiversity and the terrestrial taxa. And I'll also note that, like, to go back to the physiology question and whatever else, these species, while they're exceptionally rare globally, they tend to be extremely abundant where they are found. So there's probably hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them in that particular stream. So it's not like, the birds or our physiology studies or whatever are affecting the populations. So I think that's it. Yeah.